So I'm Lali David, I'm with OurCrowd, I run business development. I'm happy to have this panel that we are about to listen to about innovation and frontier technology. So I'm going to invite our panel members. I'll start with Niraj. Please join us. I won't present Niraj. He's well presented already. I'm going to have Barak Rabinovich join us. Barak is with F2 Partners. F2 Partners is a VC that specializes in frontier technologies. Very interesting background, making a journey from the US to Israel, finishing his MBA at Harvard, and starting traditionally with Morgan Stanley, but continuing to a more interesting, I would say, background in gaming technology, more recently with the lead VC in Israel called Genesis, and recently with F2. And F2 sits literally at the junction of early stage companies, and you can describe more of that after. I'm going to have Matt join us, Matt from GKPR, Matt Krieger. Another interesting journey, I would say, from educational background to journalism and to marketing and PR, and basically giving a unique perspective of marketing from a global perspective, but focusing on technology, being named as one of the leading tech journalists in the world. Happy to have you here. And finally, we have Janak Sarda. Please join us. And I think what's interesting about Janak coming from Deshut Group in India, but with publishing entities across the globe in different places, in India, in Dubai, and in Germany. So I think that adds another global perspective of media looking into innovation. And before we actually go into the panel, I wanted to take a quick moment and identify in the audience representative from our portfolio companies that have not been mentioned here before. So please stand up, whoever is here from our portfolio companies. I've seen Ronen from Seleno over there. Seleno is a leading technology from Israel in Wi-Fi. And I saw Liran before from Push-Ups over there. Anyone else that I've missed? All right. We'll see more later in the evening panels. Before we start, I wanted to say something about innovation, that I think we in Israel, we feel innovation as a tsunami, basically. Innovation itself is a trend in Israel. We keep hosting Chief Innovation Officers, which is a title that did not used to exist before, and now we host Chief Innovation Officers from so many multinationals coming to Israel. And I wonder, and I think it's interesting to think about whether innovation, to what extent is innovation local, to what extent is it global, something that is considered innovative in Israel and can be already, so old-fashioned elsewhere. I think it's actually the contrary, things that are old-fashioned in Israel and are innovative in different places of the world, but it's a matter of discussion. So we're going to start actually, Barak, with you. Looking about innovation from an early stage perspective, what do you see as the most significant trends, and do you see them as being local to Israel, or do you see things that are more global across the globe?
Sure, thanks. The way we look at the world over the next 10 years is, this huge explosion of data, need artificial intelligence to make sense of the data, and then push it out to connected devices where people are engaging with the data. And all those connected devices then just fuel this cycle. More data coming from more devices, more AI needed to make sense of it, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I think another question that's interesting to ask is, what are the relevant trends for an economy where you have 30% internet penetration, which is the case in India? So for that, we can actually look and ask not what's happening in the next 10 years, but what happened in the last 10 years. And it's almost like we have an opportunity now when we think about India to go in a time machine, and we can get back to the basics. So we saw all of these trends play out in Israel, catering to the US market. And what I'm talking about are things like advertising technology, games, e-commerce. These are things that Israel was bread and butter in Israel over the last 10 years, but they've become passé for venture capital in Israel looking forward. And I think you'll find a very receptive audience in Israel in these sectors and a huge opportunity to tap into between Israel and India.
But to what extent do you see that as being very early stage versus later stage? Do you see the advantage of early stage companies being able to innovate more quickly or adapt or pivot and adapt to an upcoming markets?
I think that India is just a blue ocean right now. If we drill down to certain sectors, let's say one hot sector in the world today, insurance technology. In India, there's 20% insurance coverage. It's unbelievable. 80% of people are not covered by insurance, and so there's an opportunity to maybe reimagine this technology and what worked in the West and reimagine it for India and find a huge audience to tap into. Or take education. India is the largest education system in the world. And so we take a trend of education technology and adapt it with local partners, crucially with local partners, and find a huge opportunity.
Niraj, actually to continue this, in Israel we've seen AR and VR being significant trends, but do you agree that in the Indian perspective, different things would become the more innovative trends and the more relevant trends than what we see in Israel, or maybe things that we've seen, as Barak said, in the last 10 years are actually going to be upcoming now in India?
Sure, thanks for that. I basically want to just take on from what Barak said first, and in context of this broader theme of Israel-India opportunity. I think at one level I agree with Barak's observation that when you look at this blue ocean, as you described it, and you look at, just about 30% of penetration to potentially in the next 3-4 years going to maybe 50-55% penetration. I think what you need to bear in mind is if you look towards India as a potential market, just the same way that you would be, say, serving in the United States or any of the other sort of developed markets, my advice would be that India is really, there are two parts to it. There is something that we all, here will say India, and then there is Bharat or Middle India. And when you look at about 150 to 200 million consumers who have been the early adopters, for whom their lifestyle and their daily sort of process is as akin to their counterparts in mainstream Europe, in a prosperous environment like the United States or any of those kind. Those customers will actually have preferences very similar to, and it is just that digital is further aiding that entire process. Then you look at a potential 600, 700, 800 million consumers. We've got, companies like Facebook, etc. We have become like the last big bastion of growth, because unlike China, where there was a $3 trillion economy that was created pretty much on the back of one action, and that one action was Google, you can't come to China, that created a $3 trillion ecosystem. In our case, every one of these mainstream companies have an opportunity, because that is pretty much the essence of the free market democracy that's practiced. So I think that at one level would be, whilst it would be nice to also serve into what was probably extremely topical, and it's very right, we need that, because we've got 500-600 million aspiring people who are getting online, and they're just discovering media consumption in a completely different, immersive way. So to your question on VR, let me just take 30 seconds and talk about, Hungama is a digital media company, and we did our first augmented reality initiative, I think, in 2011, and in 2012 there was we actually looked at something at the Mahindra Auto Show, where we did a live augmented reality simulation on the launch of a new motor vehicle. And we see tremendous opportunities with VR and our broader media entertainment industry. And I think in VR, whilst there's a lot of work that's happening on the hardware side, it's really a similar situation to when 4K televisions were made, but we were waiting for 4K software. That wasn't really ready. When it comes to VR, you are going to require that kind of software. And I think a lot of the music and movie clips, I'm sorry, we tend to, even in our movies, out of the blue, we will sort of do a little jig in Trafalgar Square or whatever, and we're quite unabashed about it. I think we are doing some experiments with how we can bring movie trailers into that experience. We're doing some work with shows which are musical concerts. And here, I mean, Intel has been an investor in our company last 5 years. They're helping us, in really not just the sort of setup, but when we recognize you go deeper in the level of processing and computing that is required to enable. So the same team which has worked on what they did with the Brazil Olympics, for instance, are initiatives that we are looking to work around, and we're excited about it. But still small as a segment, and unfortunately small for us is if we don't have 10 million people, that's like really small.
Matt, I think it's interesting that you work with very significant customers and very early stage customers. So you have that experience of working with Apple, but also working with early stage startups, and maybe figuring out how innovation is also a strong selling point for later stage companies, early stage companies, and what's the difference in terms of using that innovative angle of a company when marketing their products in different territories?
Yeah, thank you. So as Lali said, we work with both larger companies such as Apple and Microsoft and Flex, helping them with their communications and strategy work in Israel, and we also have the privilege of working with startups here, helping them communicate around the world. And I think kind of echoing off of what was said already in the panel, but taking a little bit of a different approach, in terms of where I see the possibility of both what's happening in India and where Israeli, let's say, startups can be effective, looking at it not from the consumer angle, but more from the industrial, or let's say the business-to-business angle. And I think there are two areas where I believe there's going to be tremendous opportunity for India companies or India enterprises to partner with Israeli startups and Israeli early stage companies. And that comes in both the industrial IoT space, with John referenced earlier, mPrest, as well as on the cybersecurity side. But just to start with, in terms of industrial IoT, the Prime Minister Modi, and the India government is making a big concerted effort in terms of boosting manufacturing in India and having the Make in India campaign really run a lot of what's happening in terms of where the country is going as far as smart manufacturing and connected manufacturing. And Israel has become quite a significant player in terms of how they look and the type of companies that are being built around that space. In particular, if you look at it, the connected manufacturing space has become quite significant, but that is only allowed to be effective if the manufacturing is secure and if the manufacturing is not going to break down. And Israel has done quite a nice job in terms of making sure that the manufacturing process is going to place so you have industrial integrity, so that you know that you're not going to break down in the middle of the manufacturing process. So we've had the chance to work with several companies in that space. And as India becomes a much more significant player as far as the manufacturing is concerned, it becomes much more important to make sure those processes are in place, that it's not going to falter in the middle of the process. As more manufacturing comes to India from China, it's going to become more integral to the economies to make sure that those processes are in place so that the manufacturing continues to move forward at the pace that it needs to be. So I think that's one area. And then the other side of that is on cybersecurity. Everyone talks about cybersecurity, and I think in terms of where Israel has become a real leader is in the cyberspace, and I think specifically when it comes to large enterprises. But large enterprises, there are several different categories that we can look at, both from the mobile aspect as well as from the network aspect and the device aspect. So that kind of touches the broad range of both cyber as well as how to work with large companies in India. And a large company in India is probably tens of thousands of people, where in Israel that there are hardly any companies that exist at that size. In fact, there are none, and that again is a separate challenge for Israel. I think cyber also touches on the manufacturing side as well, as companies need to make sure that they are secure enough so that they can bring in the business and attract the right type of partners so that they can help grow on the manufacturing side. So I think Israel has a real benefit in terms of where they've gone already, where the country has gone, to really offer a nice and unique opportunity to partner with larger Indian companies.
It's actually a good lead to the next question, because Janak, what interests me is that even if we know that, okay, the opportunity lies in IoT and in cyber, to what extent the media can actually capture those areas of innovation and make them indeed exciting for the audience? To what extent do you, across the different countries that you're active in, see the media giving a title and creating a trend where, okay, now every manufacturing facility would actually think about cyber in the next line of business and think about the opportunities in the Internet of Things?
Sure. So just to give you a perspective of the kind of media that we are talking about, India is a land of almost 22 languages in 13 written scripts. So that's the diversity that we are talking about. If I were to take my own industry, we circulate about 68 million copies of newspaper per day. Penetration of digital media as such in the news space itself was about 9.4 million active users in 2013. I'm told today we are 34 million. YouTube alone has 180 million active users per month. So that's the kind of scale that we are talking about. Of course, adaptation is extremely fast. A lot of the kind of advertising related interactions that we've been having since yesterday. I see a lot of opportunity for the people in that space in Israel to come to India and look at organizations which they would be interested in to kind of come and do the test marketing as such, if I were to say, on how their product is accepted in this country with such a large diversity before going global. You mentioned about IoT. The kind of IoT work that is happening in India is, I think, remarkable. Of course, when I see innovation in Israel, I still feel India has a lot to catch up to, but the deployment in the agriculture sector or the space research, the ISRO, the Indian Space Research Organization, which is doing some remarkable work, is also helping the IoT space with various kind of innovations around deploying their learnings and their sensors, and they're going everywhere, from farm to media to I think everywhere. So what Neeraj just spoke about AR and VR, the kind of placement that they have since 2011, I think it has changed quite a bit. The advertising has adapted it, it's working across all industries as such. Cybersecurity, of course, he was just mentioning about cybersecurity. Unlike Singapore, which it seems has literally shut down most of their small incubators around the IoT space to see how global reaction to the malware attack shapes up over the next 6 months. India hasn't done that. We haven't stopped our innovation or incubators who are working in the IoT space as such. But if you go to Singapore today, you'll find that most of them have been asked to kind of lie low till they deal with this threat and are sure that it won't attack Singapore as such. I don't think we've stopped doing any of that. So it's an interesting space to be in, and India, of course, is at the forefront of adapting to the IoT in a very big way.
But do you see a specific role in terms of your role in the media landscape, in terms of highlighting, putting things in the spotlight, influencing the way that things are shaping up into a trend?
Yes, media, of course, is at the forefront of, in a way, changing the way consumers behave and adapt to this revolution as such. And of course, with the global readers, like the Microsoft and the Googles, and with the CEOs now, they're mostly Indians. There's a lot of belief, and penetration is thereby becoming very easy to go down to the to the masses or penetrating a lot higher. And in the newspaper space, of course, there's a lot that we are adopting to, not just in manufacturing or newspaper printing as such, but even otherwise, right up to circulation, where we can literally do some mapping on the way newspapers are distributed. So, yeah.
Well, in light of the huge numbers that are not even ever discussed in Israel in terms of languages, different users, internet users, everything, I'm actually going to ask you, Barak, again, in the point about early stage companies, do you think an early stage company can actually be successful in working in India being the first market of deployment?
Yeah, I do, especially in certain sectors like, say, 3D printing. And very often now in Israel, you have, actually one of the things, we're known for cyber, we're known for a lot of things. Israel's actually a big power when it comes to printing. And when I meet entrepreneurs in this space, they get very focused on their capabilities. So nano and micro level 3D printing. And my response to them is, yes, but what's the killer application? And they say, what do you mean by killer application? And I give them an example. I say, I'm in venture capital. If you could tell me which are the 5 companies Sequoia Capital is seeing today, I would pay you a lot of money for that. That's a killer application in my business. Now, for 3D printing, we can find the killer application, say in India, in the manufacturing sector, whether it's to make decals on motorcycles, I don't know what. You couple that with a printing company that has a great technology and is looking for that killer application, and I think a big opportunity can result. And if you get in early stage, you can still influence those roadmaps and then build very nice distribution. And the beauty of India is that the logistics and the distribution, a lot of it is in place. I visited India with my family, maybe it was 8 years ago. And a few things, I remembered a lot about the trip, but a few things stuck in my mind. One was the amazing laundry system where laundry is brought to a central depository, and somehow it's sorted and it magically comes back to the person who sent it. And the second thing was the meal delivery service, where folks go off to work in downtown Mumbai, and their spouses send the food maybe a few hours later, and it arrives, a hot meal on their desk, almost magically. If I were to tell you, Lali, let's start a company that can do that, you'd say you're crazy, it's impossible. But in India, it's done. So maybe you can layer on a very interesting business.